Not quite. We're ready, Mr. Chair.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. Sorry for the rough start. It's kind of like I say this all the time. When my ship came in, I was at the airport, but an analogy in today's environment is I was on Teams when I should have been on Zoom. So with that, I will call the meeting to order and I can ask for an approval of the agenda as circulated.
I so moved, David.
Seconder?
Dr. Marty.
Thank you. Any questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Motion carried. Are there any conflicts of interest to disclose as per the agenda today? In the absence of any conflicts of interest, we can proceed with the presentation from Jim Tech. Jihad, I believe, will.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be sharing my screen back. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start with a progress update on where we are with Capital Region Sport Recreation assets, including trails this time. The assignment is to update the inventory of the assets in the region, plot these assets in GIS, and then identify sources with open data relevant to various types of trails within the capital region, obtain that data, plot it in GIS, and then make recommendations to the next steps. As I mentioned, this is work in progress. We're not complete yet in our project here. So first, we sent an inventory of assets form that we previously sent last year to all the communities, and we received the information back. Then we plotted that revised information in GIS. I'm going to demonstrate that later in the presentation. Relevant to trails, we so far identified 4 open sources, and we will be in touch with folks here joining us virtually as well from the province to see if they have more information. So we got the Trails MB info, which shows the snowmobile trails. We looked at the website, the Overpass Turbo, which is private, like similar to Google Maps. We got information from Natural Resources Canada, vector-based mapping. We also received information from the city of Fredericton, their shape files within city limits as well. And we obtained that information and plotted it in JS, and I'm going to show you a demo later on. We'll start with a very high level briefing on the various types of trails and the level of service associated. Pedestrian and multi-use trails, like the name indicates, multi-use. This is one of the pictures here in the city of Fredericton. These type of trails are mainly in urban environment, and they're used for walking, jogging, commuting. And usually they're wide and paved over the gravel tops. Natural path, again, like the picture says, it's dirt and gravel in the wilderness. Some of them would have educational purposes and signage, and some of them are backcountry, more remote, and some of them are in rocky areas. And these are usually narrower, require much less maintenance. Cycling trails, again, variety of that type. Some of them are along the railway line and don't have a lot of grade, and some within the city or in any community, really, a bike lane for with the road. And The one in the picture here is off-road. That's the one in the Minto, the bike BMX trail in Minto. So various types of cycling trails. Equestrian trails, mainly for horseback riding, but they can be used for shared use. However, they require proper etiquette. I think there's gonna be quite a book on what that means, but it's definitely not something we're very used to here. Then we have the water and winter trails, water trails along the water bodies for canoeing, kayaking. Then you have the snowmobile trails, and some of them are groomed. And then the cross-country ski and snowshoe trails, and winter trails, and so on. So as you can see, there's a wide variety of trail types depending on their usage. And a lot of time, the usage dictate the dimensions or the maintenance requirements on those trails. So some of the level of service considerations are dimensions. For example, if you want to choose to have a trail for cycling, it's going to be 3 meters wide. The surface, it impacts accessibility and safety, whether it's a natural path, leave it as dirt or gravel or pave it or board it. Wayfinding, accessibility, there's a lot of examples for features like signage and special signage and way guiding and beacons and so on and so forth, designed with features mainly for the visually or hearing impaired individuals. Comfort and safety features include lighting, benches, shade structures, first aid kits, and so on. Recreation and fitness features such as bike racks, repair stations, exercise stations, outdoor gym equipment, fishing and picnic areas, and so on. Parking and transportation amenities such as trailhead parking lots, bike parking and storage, public transit connections, and then special features such as lookouts and viewing platforms, paddling launch sites, canoeing, kayaking. And the level of service, also the maintenance needs to be go hand in hand with the level of service, the maintenance requirement, whether we're clearing the snow, when or how frequently you would resurface, you would do the branch trimming, etc. That would definitely impact cost. Anything to do with level of service would have cost implications. So now we're gonna, well, before we get to the demo, we classified the trails within the capital region into 3 categories based on the open data sources that we have. But as we receive more information, we could add different classifications. So far, we have the snowmobile trail network, plus the provincial trails, the cycleway trails, and the footway designated path. And I want to make sure that I bring it to your attention that the data from the open sources is not 100% accurate. Like, you can take that with a grain of salt type of deal. It's free data. Snowmobile trails have about 900 kilometers within the capital region service commission boundaries. And you can see them highlighted in turquoise. Cycleway or cycling trail, cycling path, mainly around Fredericton or Mukto, and there's one from Fredericton Junction towards Sunbury York South, is at least what the open data is telling us. And there's a tiny one here in Hanwell proper. There's a lot of footway and pedestrian path within the capital region. It's a spaghetti mess. It's overwhelming. So all these small lines, the green and the brown, represent footway path. And again, in the demo, we'll get to zoom in more in specific areas and specific locations if you wish. So let's switch to the demo.
May have open.
Okay. So can, let's try see if, Mr. Chair, can you see our screen here? That has a Google Earth. Okay. So this here is basically, all the sport, recreation, and cultural assets. I'll start with that. That's the stuff we updated. It's a layer. When you enable it, they'll all come live. To zoom in on one of them, give you an idea of what we captured. For example, this is in Odell Park. It's all the various pieces of the park. School, ball field here. Prospect Ball Diamonds, so you can see all the various types of assets, their geographic location, and there's a lot of attributes that are not on the screen, but in the Excel file that you could use for filtering and basically gives you a better idea of what you have in each community. I happen to be zooming in on Fredericton. This is Oromocto here. And all the assets as well. The more you zoom in, the closer you have, the more information you can see. So basically, we took all the information we received from the CEOs and we plotted it geographically. Let's take another Arcadia here, for example. If we zoom in on the Humphreys Wharf, you'll see the various types of activities here. You got a little bit of boat launch. Some kayaking and swimming as well. So we took all the activities that happen in those areas and we plotted them geographically. So this is what the sport, recreation, cultural asset would look like. Let's disable that layer. And we'll switch to the trails now. So with the communities, you can see these are the various communities within the Capital Region Service Commission. We looked at the boundaries for those communities. And this is the whole map. So these are the various communities. And then we can go to the various types of trails. We enable the city of Fredericton trails, the shape files we received from the city. This is what we get. If we add the cycling path, this is now the network that we have. Like I mentioned earlier, the cycling is mainly in this area. There isn't much, at least in the open sources, in the other communities. Now, if we look at the snowmobile or the provincial path, this is how the network would look. If you like to enable the roads, you can see where the intersections, clearly where the intersections are with the main routes or Trans-Canada Highway, so on and so forth. Once we start adding the footpath and the other types of trails, it's gonna become really busy. So you can see there's a lot of these paths. And if you zoom in on specific communities, I don't know, let's say I'm familiar with Fredericton the most, so this would be Odell Park, for instance. All the path within Odell Park. Over here, you can see the path around Blarney Lake as well. So it's simple turn on, turn off layer, and you can see what's in those areas. If you want me to zoom in on a particular area, I can. Like I said, this is work in progress. Maybe the province of New Brunswick would have more shape files, more layers, more specifics about trail types, we would be glad to incorporate in this. So I hope this will give you like a high level taste of what we have, and for next steps, what we would be suggesting. So trying to share my screen, that's not letting me.
I see it now.
Yeah, good. So I guess for next steps, what we're suggesting, for short term is to build on what we have and create a more reliable data set and dissect it in whichever way you like based on the various types of trails. And maybe start the discussions in your community with various councils and with neighbor communities about the social and economical benefit of trails. Maybe you want to discuss opportunities for connection among, especially among neighboring communities. That would be the low hanging fruit. If there's enough appetite and that's something your communities wanna pursue further, ultimately you're gonna need a master plan basically on what types of trails you're gonna connect with. Is it the cycling type? Is it the paved, unpaved? What amenities? How are we gonna split the costs, so on and so forth? How are you gonna cross major routes? And that would require a robust plan that would be a medium to a long term. Now, the implementation of that plan would also be long term. So that's it for me, Mr. Chair. Happy to answer any questions anybody may have so far.
Thank you, Jihad. Questions from those around the table?
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Shahad, for all of that. As we said, we updated the asset inventory, which was demonstrated here today, which was great. And that was tested with the CAOs and other sources to ensure that we had that accuracy. So we'll be able to take that portion of the mapping and share that with the communities and put those up on our websites as well for all the communities in the region. Within the trails, to continue the discussion, at the next meeting, it's our intent to have a presentation or have a conversation with our colleagues at our Economic Development Agency on with Ignite. They have a merge program, which I think most communities have been at least made aware of or working with, and several are working with them. And I know, Mr. Chair, your community's one of them. And they've offered one of the spots to the Capital Region Service Commission. This is a program that's funded a small portion, about 25%, 25% by the commission, then the remaining 75% through a COA. And really what it is to develop a proposal on what a blue trail system could look like and the interconnectivities on that as well. So taking from Jihad's point, how do we build this to make it a frame that we can see some long-term benefit to? And that's, of course, if that's what the committee wants to recommend to the board so wishes. I would also, if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask, I don't know, Rob, I don't want to put you on the spot. Rob Nish and his team are here from Tourism, Heritage and Culture. They're with the ME Trail staff are here as well. And just wondering, Rob, if you have any insight of things that we could look at moving forward. And then I have one more after that, Mr. Chair. Sorry.
Hi, thanks. It's okay for putting us on the spot. No problem there. You can hear us okay?
Yes.
Okay. So here in the room, myself with THC, Michelle DeCourcy with THC, and Tanya Morehouse with Natural Resources. Tanya's the trails coordinator there. We work with trails for tourism, and we're spending the afternoon together to work on trail stuff. On ATV, so point to mention, you might want to include ATV in this. I think, like, first thought would be maybe to consider what the capital region's priorities are around trails. Like, what are you trying to accomplish by investing in trail infrastructure? I understand the attraction to, to moving towards building the database and gathering those types of resources. There's lots of value in that. Our experience in doing that is that a lot of information that's out there is, it's not necessarily reliable because of the capabilities that any given person on this planet today can use their phone to capture their location, upload it to a site, and then as we people who are interested in these inventories scrape those sites, we end up with a whole bunch of lines. We don't know who captured it. We don't know what's there. We don't know the quality of it. So I exercise a great deal of caution in relying on that kind of information. Just an observation, not a criticism for going there. We go there too, and then go, oh, we know that is not a trail because we've been there. At the risk of rambling on, I just suggest that, establishing some priorities around what the capital region wants to accomplish with trails would be, I think, incredibly important. As you all are probably very well aware, there are different activities compete for the same footprint and are often not compatible without a bunch of work and the development of solutions that are not readily available at this time.
Yeah.
So I'll leave it there. Maybe Michelle or Tanya might have something to add if you want.
No, I'd just say that we're happy to meet with anyone there who's interested in hashing it out or discussing the vision. This is what we do.
I mean, we're working ourselves on essentially a provincial strategy with regards to trail development. So, having the conversation, sitting down and having a conversation with you and possibly giving you opportunity to kind of run some priorities by us to see maybe there are other regional service commissions too that are already pretty advanced in their trail development strategies. So, we wouldn't mind, hosting a meeting to identify that either. We're totally here to support anything trails, but yeah.
So if I may add to your point, Rob, with respect to the spurious data out there, I understand, this is the thing that's been circulating around my mind is this curation activity that has to happen to know the current state, where we are at with trails within the capital region. I know when I saw what Jihad had presented, the various layers from various purposes of trails, I think that's the scary thing is we don't know. And so what gaps are we trying to fill without knowing where we're at? So it's...
Yes, I understood, appreciate that perspective. It's very real. I think, so you have to start somewhere. So,
yes,
right. So there's a place to start, for sure. I don't know, I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, but maybe an ideal circumstance would, and we're going to get into the challenges of execution here, but we have, it's not perhaps publicly available, and we've been working on and are feel very close to having an internal product that would establish a baseline for what we would call a visitor ready trail. So what is a minimum standard that a trail should meet in order for the RSC to feel comfortable putting it on your website?
Yeah.
I've had a lot of interaction with Dave Seabrook around the Blue Trails, same kind of thing. Right? That's clearly the minimum that needs to be met. So of all those lines that we can look at that are out there, is it possible to eliminate all that don't meet some minimum standard? Because your inventory can really only be made up of what does, what could, and where the gaps are. So,
Yes.
which would be a lot of work. But there may be some ways to cross-reference some of that data with organizations like River Valley Cycling. If you're not familiar, there's a local cycling club that manage, if you will, cycling trails, mountain bike trails out here in Marysville, in Willistock on Crown lease and or author license of occupation. Mountain Bike Mendo. So I think if a trail is attached to an organization of repute, a positive repute, then that would, that might be the beginnings of validating that those trails on the map are actually ones that you want to include in your inventory. If that
In fact, kind of, lightens the lift because, in my opinion, we've heard from various groups that we've spoken with, whether it's a healthcare professional looking to make New Brunswick their home, how important it is to have an active and healthy lifestyle. We don't want to be getting in a situation where I'll say something I've said before, you never get a second chance for first impression. Someone comes here, gets on a trail, starts going down it, and then Joe Farmer comes out and saying, hey, you're going across my field. And just because it showed up on Trail Forks or wherever. So whatever, in my opinion, as a municipal leader, we have to be very confident in what we put out to the public as officially as trails. So I'd rather be reserved in that respect and feel very confident on it than just kind of going with, urban myths, so to speak. And we've spoken about this around our committee's table before. There's a lot of urban myths out there. Now, there's the flip side where, all of us municipal leaders around this table have worked with, let's say, DTI. We know what's involved with getting a road to be considered a provincial road or a municipal road. There's a whole, I don't want to print out the level of standards required to make a road, and nor do I want any more roads. But,
yeah.
So, there's somewhere in between of that level of bureaucracy and to where the level where we're encouraging and developing and recognizing the gaps we have within our region that people we've heard it over and over again. I hear it in my community. We went through the strategic planning process and we heard it from the youth up to the elderly, how important trails are to them. That, in their own backyard, they do not know what exists. And we've heard how important that is. And I think we have a role to play as leaders to try to get this right. And we need to, in my opinion, we have to do it in partnership with our the provincial counterparts, which are you folks, and try to start somewhere. And really, it's putting on a hat I had in the corporate world. It's exercising curation. That's what this is at this stage.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I agree with your first assessment. I disagree with your first assessment. The second one you stated, I kind of agree somewhat. I don't believe we should be screening out any passable trail, whether it's just a walking, hiking trail. I don't believe we should be evaluating them on we're not going to talk about this one. It's not going to show up on the map. I would go the other way and I would say we put all trails, supposing they're just walking or hiking, and we let the people decide what they want to take. Put the data out on this is a trail that's not very good, or it's a D or E or F trail, and let the people decide what kind of a trail they want, rather than us, as a community leaders, just take a bunch out. So I don't know if that makes sense, but
it does make sense. David, it does make sense because this is the kind of stuff we have to talk about. Yeah.
Everybody is looking for something different.
Yeah.
Some people want challenges, some don't. Some just want to go for a good walk, hike, or ATV run or whatever. And that's where we should be providing the data on, yes, that would fit this, or no, it wouldn't. There's challenges on this one. It doesn't fit ATVs, it doesn't fit cycling, and so on and so forth. And I think we have the responsibility as community leaders to put that forth to the people and let them decide.
David, it might be the case in those situations where it's just a labeling. It's unvetted by us. Really, it just goes into another category. We can't stand over where the ownership exists or what its status is. Just
Right.
being upfront.
The user, the participant needs to know what the trail is about, what the consequences are, what it crosses, the challenges, and that's kind of my perspective on it, I guess.
Well, we wholeheartedly agree with that, and I guess just, I think we're, as individuals here, very practical minded. I understand very well that we're sitting in the G&B boardroom and speaking about layers of, bureaucracy and having a list of criteria to evaluate a trail against to determine if it's ready for visitors is definitely through the G&B corporate lens, where risk management is the highest order concern, and tied to that, user experience. So, I like everything, gentlemen, sorry, I don't know your name, but everything you spoke to makes sense. I guess one of the decision points for all of us is, how do we point people to these places that they could go? There's a bunch of different online forums, All Trails or apps, All Trails, Trail Forks, to name a couple, Strava. There is an abundance of information available where somebody else is owning the responsibility of saying, here's some trails that could be a way to point the public to that which has not been validated, that which we can't be sure have any reasonable amount of safety measures in place to make sure that resident that wants to go do something fun and have a good time will be safe. I think that it just becomes a bit of a decision point, I guess, to determine what we're all comfortable with telling people to go to. So
yes, I think that's where the community leaders and Gemtech and your group all need to sit down and work this out. Like, yeah, safety's great. I agree with that, but we can go down a highway, one of the best highways in New Brunswick, and not come home. I mean, yep. Yes, we try to make it safe. We try to do everything possible. But if people have the warning, there are challenges or consequences, I think then you can't take that aspect away from people. They have to make that decision. As long as they know beforehand and they're warned. And I think the municipal leaders, Gemtech and you people, I think if we could get that together, it's not something that'll happen in a day or two. But if we could get that together and let people know and let them make the decision, is all I'm saying, rather than we have a body say, no, you can't do this on that trail. It's doesn't fit the standards or whatever. I don't know. I seem, as John knows, sometimes I have a different way of thinking, and I'm never embarrassed with that because I try to think outside of the box a lot of the time. So,
I mean, I'll say this from my perspective, knowing what asset management is and how to manage certain standards, and the fact that in New Brunswick we have a thing called joint and several liability, which I would not be comfortable putting my name on every trail and then having a disclaimer that it may or may not be safe. I will be left holding the bag as a municipality, and everyone else will be as well. So for that, I mean, I certainly understand where you're coming from, David, from the perspective of wanting people to explore, but there's many private entities and bloggers out there that can do that for us because they don't owe joint and several liability. I do. If everyone else goes away, the city of Fredericton, the town of Oromocto, your community can't just absolve itself of that liability like a private entity can. So for that, I would be hesitant to just put anything on your map. The other fact to that is it's overwhelming. So if you're gonna start with something, you really wanna develop a plan where you're gonna prioritize a particular trail or two that you wanna focus on and set to build a project based on that. Cause to Jihad's point, we look at all those trails, I mean, look, folks, it'll take 1,000,000 years to to look at all those things and get them, you know, hammered out to the point where you might get a group of 12 or 14 people to agree. So I think from that perspective, if it's this committee's task would be to try to find a couple of trails that you want to start and prioritize with, and then you can develop some plan on that basis. But, you know, so that would be, you know, my 2 cents on what I've heard so far.
I couldn't recall us having this discussion or starting this discussion at our November meeting. And at that time, there seemed to be an interest, or there was an expression that there was probably an interest amongst the directors of the commission to look at connectivity of existing. And there was a recognition at that time is the commission doesn't own trails. The majority of the trails are community-based, either owned and operated by a municipal jurisdiction or a community not-for-profit. Some of those trails are ripe for connection, some of them aren't. And I thought that our focus was going to be around looking at possible facilitation of making or helping connect or helping jurisdictions connect these trails where it makes sense to do so. And I think we've got to focus, like we've got to figure out what our focus is. To me, the inventory is not the product we should be focusing on. The inventory to me is potentially a means to an end, and that end is connectivity of a variety of different trails, the potential connectivity of a variety of different trails within our region. My sense, we get off, we lose sight of that, and we get into thinking, or we tend to think that the end is this map to share with tourists or with our own constituents of where they can go and walk or bike or snowmobile or ATV on trails. And I don't think that's what our committee should be focused on. It should be potentially, we should be looking at maybe, you know, is there a space where we can help develop a framework on how jurisdictions within our region can work to connect trails. You know, we don't have to go too far to see very successful connections, i.e. between Fredericton and Orlando. We don't have to go very far to see where connections make total sense, i.e. between New Maryland and Fredericton, or Hanwell and Fredericton, or, you know, there's all kinds of, you know, practical work we can help facilitate if there is a true desire to make those connections. It's interesting, you know, I've sort of worked in and out of this area for 35 years, and I hear the same things I heard 35 years ago. If we don't have to sort of start facilitating some of these connections of trails that currently exist, we'll just continue spinning our wheels is what my feeling.
Mr. Smith, yes.
Mr. Chair, I didn't peg Grant as a segue into this, and I hope I'm not stealing Director Rogers' thunder here when I speak on this. Grant, in terms of that, I understand completely through you, Mr. Chair, what you're saying, and there has been some work. So if you recall, the intention was find out what we have, look at what's existing, then start to look at what the low-hanging fruit is to, as Jihad had put in his presentation on connectivity. the benefit of having started this work is, working with Rob and the provincial team to start that conversation, to open that up. And that came via, the Fredericton Capital Region Tourism Group, with Dave Seabrook and Stacy Russell and the team. And, the community of Fredericton, or the communities of Fredericton and Nashwauk have been working together. And I'll let, Director Rogers, is that what you were thinking of speaking on? A little bit, okay, so anyway, there's been some work done on that, looking at the type of trail, the quality of trail, the cost of this. That type there's been a high level study through a local consultant that's well known to us, Murray Jamer. And Murray's willing to come in and present that. We were hoping to have him here today. Unfortunately, the tourism team were at another event. They had been previously booked, and Murray is in somewhere very nice and warm. I'll just say that. So anyway, he wasn't available for today's meeting, but definitely want to show that grant in terms of how do we start that conversation on connectivity, and how do we look at where those connections can happen best in the region. And I'm hoping that we can find support through our provincial partners as well, Mr. Chair. So just wanted to kind of refresh that a little bit, but there is work being done in that area. And I think it's, I think you're absolutely right, Grant. That was the vision and the focus at the time.
Thank you. Director Rogers.
No, I was just going to, I put my hand up just as Grant was speaking, because I really appreciated his comments, sort of just reminding us where this all came from, and thinking that this might be a way for us to focus our work, because we can see from all of the different types of trails and the different types of ownership of the trails and the levels of maintenance of the trails. I mean, this work is endless and deep and endless. But to help us focus our work, maybe if we go back to why we began the conversation to begin with, that might help guide our work. So I just sort of wanted to reiterate, I appreciate what Grant said, and just wanted to lead into that a little bit.
Thank you. Rob.
Yeah, thanks, the grant, yeah, and as well, and Kate for sort of confirming or clearing up, I guess, what the primary objective was here. That's helpful. It seems that like sort of regional connectivity makes perfect sense. That's something we're very interested in working on with you. You know, low-hanging fruit, an example of potential low-hanging fruit is public land. So Danny's here with NRED, and you know, a large portion of it could be on there. You know, so and I know that, you know, the mention of the work that Murray was doing between Fredericton and Nashwauk, I'm familiar with. If there's, you know, what are the things that are actionable that would serve some of these priorities for the region? If figuring out how to enable more trail traffic between Stanley area and Fredericton is identified as a priority, then that's something to go to work on. If getting, improving anything between here and Ormocto is a thing, that's something to work on. If connecting Minto to the city of Fredericton is something that to work on, then there's things that can be done there. So I think I agree that if you look at all the trails, that's not necessarily helpful, can be overwhelming. But so maybe just thinking about where and why connections matter to places and the people, and then consider activity type as well. So, maybe through each, looking through the lens of each of the activity types, if you will, including active transportation, sort of defined as commuting to and from work and other places that we need to get to, as opposed to recreating. That might help to identify the different types of connectivity that we're seeking. Because mountain biking connectivity is, isolated to the mountain bike trail network located in a given area. People aren't mountain biking from here to Woolstoke, they're driving, offloading, and riding. I know this is an opinion. I think it aligns with what you're getting at. I'm not sure that, mountain biking trail networks are what the commission needs to be concerned about within the context of what I think I understand right now. They're important, don't get me wrong, but
thank you. I have a question, Rob. Is there, in the provinces and your team's future, your strategy, do you have kind of an overall view of, let's say, this section of the province of how, different parts of our region could connect together? Is there anything on like a draft or? I'm putting you on the spot here.
No, there isn't. And it's such a great question. I mean, we sort of struggle with that internally, I think, just trying to understand like what would a vision for connectivity in the province look like? In a certain way, it's such a nuanced thing. As much as I'd like to see it, I don't know if we get there. If you look at the snowmobile network as an example,
yes,
there's connectivity. Regions are connected. If we look at it with service commissions as the regions in mind, there's connectivity there. So in theory, you could have that same kind of connectivity among any type of activity. In theory, the conflict becomes the low-hanging fruit will always be something that multiple user groups will want access to. And then you get into the user conflict / safety discussion. So, I mean, it's tough. It's, part of trying to weigh one activity over the other. I was out for my walk here in Devon, Marysville area last night and took Murray Avenue and saw, I was like, oh, I walked through the power line the other day on here, and the snowmobile trail and ATV trails through there. And I was thinking, how many people want to be able to access those trails and, can't. Or can by traveling on places that other trail users don't expect to see them. Just as, I don't want to cast a negative light on this, but anyway, so no, there's no, no clear vision. I don't want to, please chime in. I know I can just keep talking, so. Any thoughts?
I know both motorized user groups, they work really hard for their connectivity, and it involves a lot of land ownership agreements to be in place and talking with freehold landowners to have ownership. And that's a concern for me, is putting out all of those trails for the public to just try to digest and determine where they want to go. There's a liability affiliated to that. And are there landowner permissions in place for some of these trails that you have spatial data for? So me knowing that, the motorized user groups have worked really hard to establish these permissions, there's a lot of work involved for the non-motorized user groups too. We don't want to see you having to walk along highways. That's no trail. To me, that's not a trail. Even cycling, there's a hazard affiliated to that. But yeah, just more than happy to work with you and look, even looking at the connectivity within your local communities. We're working with the District of Carleton North under Western Valley Regional Service Commission. They want to really develop their active transportation because they have industry there, they have school, they have recreation. And yeah, we're working with them to try to identify within that one community the connectivity of their trail network and work from there. So even if you look at each individual community initially and determine from that point and expand out. So yeah, anyway, there's lots of opportunity to work it many different ways, but yeah.
Uncontrolled, that can't be controlled.
I missed that. Was someone speaking?
No, I'll just make another comment, Mr. Chair. I think, it's ultimately going to come down to our municipal leaders to recognize or desire these connections. And if there's no interest or if there's no understanding of the potential benefits, we're really, probably spinning our tires. I would find it hard to understand how any municipal leader could not see what those benefits could be and not wish to try to start making some connections, and it just starts at one. And I think this committee and this commission is positioned well to facilitate that. Much better than any other organization that I see that exists within the province.
So it comes down to, Grant, to your point, comes down to definition and I guess to Rob's point, what are we trying to accomplish? And getting buy-in from the board.
Yeah,
You know,
sorry.
I think, isn't it going to be what the municipal leaders wish to accomplish? Like again, I'll just go to, something very simple, a connection between the Maryland and Fredericton. Like why, to me, both of those jurisdictions, I would think would have a significant interest in creating a multi-use pathway or trail to help facilitate their constituents to get from one area to another. And it doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. Right now, you have to drive on the shoulder of the highway or walk on the shoulder of the highway. But there are public lands between those two jurisdictions. There's the university obviously, owns an awful lot of that land, which I would think would be an interested partner. But to me, you got to sort of start at that level and start making those connections where it really makes sense and where there's something at the end of each of the connections that those constituents can then enjoy, i.e. like a brew pub, shopping, various recreation facilities, et cetera, a destination, that's right. But if our leaders don't feel that, that there's their desires to have this done, then there's, I think we're going to be challenged as a committee to actually help facilitate the work to get done.
So to that point, we have the leaders around the table of the board of directors for the Regional Service Commission. So, us putting forth a report and recommendations to the board to be either accepted or not, or revised perhaps, gets us started. Sees, whether we're on track for something that is desirable for the region.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say is we have two groups motorized groups that have trails all over the place. We should be talking to them that have already done it, put some places, because they're the ones that are going to be coming to the communities for tourism dollars and everything else, that aspect. So the people that have designed them and have them in place, and we should also be talking to them because they've no sense reinventing the wheel if they've invented it. So work together with those two groups, because from what I've heard sitting around this table, those two groups are pretty organized.
I'll say to get back to Grant's point on connectivity, if that's the, priority, I mean, perhaps this group can look at some different areas where connectivity can be had, but I'll admit I'm struggling a little bit because I know where my gaps are, but that's a bilateral conversation that I have with my adjoining community. It isn't a conversation I'm having with NACWIC, quite frankly. What's
It's more like a sub-regional, right?
But I'll be honest, I'm working with the city of Fredericton on how we're gonna better our connectivity when it comes to the trailway around the airport, and how we're gonna, match that better than what it is currently. And I'd be willing to do the same thing with our groups out in Burton, and we know we have a gap with our group out in Sunbury, York South, but those are bilateral conversations that our groups can have. Perhaps this committee can recommend different areas of ease for connectivity, and then it's really pitching it off to those two communities to have discussions, like how do you want to make this work? Cause I don't know how I'm supposed to help Nakwit connect to Meduktuk. I have no idea. I mean, maybe they want to do it, maybe they don't. If they do, great. They pick up the phone and they call. So that's where I'm trying to make sure I put my hat on as a member of this committee and look at it from that picture, but at the same time, you know, I'm not sure how they're gonna help me connect myself to the Burton region. I'm just gonna try to pick up the phone and deal with that community and see what we can make happen on when it comes to that. So maybe it's prioritizing points of connectivity that are easy. Because to the trails folks, I mean, I've been involved with different things over my lifetime, from pipelines to new roadways, and whenever you're trying to connect one community to the next, you're usually passing through several people's property, and that means, you know, how are you gonna do that? Are you gonna structure an agreement with a property owner? Are you gonna try to purchase the property? You're gonna have easements, there's, you know, all kinds of legal things and hoops, and so even if it's identifying that, perhaps that helps two communities that don't have the same capacity to know what the pathway is to connect. Certainly willing to help in that vein if that's sort of what we think is the best direction, because it can be a challenge if you're going to pass through 34 different property owners to find a point of connection. That's 34 difficult conversations that you're gonna have with people. And you've got to get 34 yeses, not 33. And so those are things that we have to take into account. Maybe we can do that as a larger group. I don't know. So that's what I put out on the table, to Grant's point of, you know, trying to prioritize connectivity, if that will help.
No, thank you. And I know we're running short of time. I'll quickly go to Rob and then we'll move on.
Yeah, thanks. We gotta run, we gotta give up this space and get out and start another meeting, but Grant, your comments make perfect sense to us. Start with like things like where you're willing, you know, interested participants, New Maryland to Fredericton. That's a problem to solve. We're happy to help in any way we can to work on that. As an example, sorry, gentleman of Ormocto, that example you just made or gave of where you're already working on connectivity, maybe, and maybe this is repeating what you just said, but sharing that at this committee level, the work in progress, potential opportunities in the future within your areas, and then, you know, best practices can be shared within this community. Just a couple last thoughts. We'll run, but please reach out again. We've been more than happy to sit down with anybody here, any group at any point in time and work with you. So thanks for inviting us.
Thanks for joining today.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, we'll move on to a very, very quick. Yes?
Mr. Chair, just maybe if you want, just before we go to the next steps, I'm sitting here trying to think of what the board may want to consider as direction to staff here for the next meeting. And not that I want you to keep sitting through presentations or anything like that, but let's get the presentation in on the work that's been done through the city and Nashwauk, to understand the different types of considerations that need to be made in these, because there's a whole plethora of things, whether it's active in terms of walking, whether it's motorized, what types of motorized, there's a litany of questions that need to be understood. Also within that same meeting, we could have a discussion around the Blue Trail. And if maybe we're taking too much on, maybe we're not taking, maybe we need to do that. We can invite Rob and his team again. And then look towards maybe an April meeting in which we actually have a workshop to Grant and John and David's pieces there to talk about what is it that we want to accomplish? What are we looking for in terms of that? Set the frame around it, put the vision moving forward. I don't know if that seems to summarize or if that just seems to add or what maybe.
I think we have to get crystal clear.
And that's what I think the April meeting could accomplish, Mr. Chair.
Mm. How does the committee feel?
I have a question, John.
Yeah.
Yes.
If in the meantime, do you know, the communities that have mutual interest in connecting to their neighbor meaning the community they have a geographic boundary with? Like, do we know of, like, you mentioned yourself, John, and Fredericton are in discussions. It seems like Fredericton and Nashwauk are in discussions. So do we know of other folks who are in discussions that might be interested in connecting?
But
Go
I
ahead.
think, Mr. Chairman, I think what it's gonna depend upon, Shahad, or through you, Mr. Chair, and what it's gonna depend upon is the connectivity, the quickness of the connectivity, we see it as a win in the communities, and also the cost of the connectivity. Some look very small on a map. They can be very costly, because you never know what you're dealing with, whether you got a river, a valley, or something there that may need a lot of infrastructure work around it to make that connectivity work. So I think, in terms of that, is to be able to flesh that out a little further within that, but I think it's also for this committee's work to flesh out a little bit more of a definition of, to the chair's point, to get kind of crystal clear on what we want, and there are multiple opinions, and there will be multiple more, but it's to try to bring everyone together to try to hone that in with people that workshop that very well.
Perhaps in that workshop, we could be, it's a questionnaire to our board in terms of what interest is there of you in your connectivity and what does it look like? Where are you interested in being connected to and what does it look like? What type of connectivity?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Like, connectivity is great, and I'd love to see all the municipalities and the rural districts connected in capital service region. And then it would be a move forward for the capital service region to connect with other capital service region, which is beyond our capacity, but we have an expensive river dividing almost half of our municipalities, and that's what creates, in my opinion, Central York, a very economically challenged connectivity to get to Hanwell, Harvey, New Maryland, whatnot. Like, there's very few crossings, and the crossings are busy. Are we able to get a trail across some of these? That's the huge connectivity issue, in my opinion, of the capital service of connecting them all. It seems to be a north and south connectivity that's easy. But when you get by that, there's a challenge, and I think somehow we need to work hard on that challenge, and it won't be cheap. How you do it, I don't have the answer. I don't know. Jihad may have the answer.
Well, just that point, that's happened elsewhere in this province fairly recently when it comes to snowmobile trails up north in Miramichi. They named a bridge devoted towards that.
But I think it comes back to what Jihad was saying, what's the level of mutual interest? If there isn't any, this stuff is all just pie in the sky. Like the Snowmobile Federation, there's considerable mutual interest to make those connections and advocate for those crossings. It only takes two jurisdictions on opposite sides of a waterway that have huge amount of mutual interest to make something like that work. But we need to know whether there is that interest. And I agree with John, like, I mean, there's a high potential that some municipal jurisdictions won't have any interest at all. But there's probably a high possibility that there will be many that do, and many that are very doable. So like it comes back to what is our mandate in helping make that happen? Like, and it is, I agree, it's cloudy to me. Do we have any role? other than maybe, you know, getting the discussion rolling, but to me, it really does rest with Mayor A and Mayor B recognizing, hey, we gotta get together and make this connection, because it makes a lot of sense for both of our municipalities. And then if we have a role to play, let's figure that out, but like I don't see that interest necessarily coming from the state. It's just like anything, right?
Mr. Chairman, gauging that interest is something that could be done at this level, and once we know who's interested in where, we can probably facilitate more workshops, present more information for possible connection points, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that goes to the point, if we have a workshop coming up, a questionnaire for the participating municipalities in the capital region. You know, put it on paper. Are you interested or not? And what is your interest in connectivity? Where to where? Okay, but let's move on now to quickly a Blue Trails.
Mr. Chair, Dr.
Yes.
Rogers had her hand
Oh,
up
sorry.
there,
Sorry, Director Rogers. You're on mute.
I was just
You're on.
thinking, based on where the conversation's going, like, I think if neighboring communities had interest in developing connectivity, they would just talk to each other. Like, I just really feel that I do think that there's been a role for the Regional Service Commission in this and regional infrastructure looking at this opportunity, even if it's just like shining a light on it and saying and encouraging municipalities to do interconnectivity work and stuff like that. But I just still believe that if municipalities wanted to take this on, they could do it themselves. They don't really need this body. We talk to each other, right? Like neighboring communities can talk to each other and so I don't know, again, I think it's us, we have to figure out what our place is as a regional service commission. What's our place in this work? It shouldn't need to be connecting communities for conversation. We should all be able to do that on our own. Could be encouraging us to be looking at it and saying what that might look like and things to consider. Like, if you're thinking of doing this, think of all the potential different types of ownership and the legality and the maintenance. It might be a little workbook on what that would look like, but I think that would really be the extent of it. So
Thank you. Moving on, we do have to move on. Let's move on to the Aquatic Center. Sorry, the Blue Trails discussion. I know we're probably going to have very limited time.
Yeah, on the Blue Trail, Mr. Chair, through you, that would be just that conversation around the potential proposal to develop something around what does that look like, using the merge program to help support local startups and smaller companies and things like that could tie into what we're talking about here.
Thank you. Okay, and moving on to the Aquatic Center.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, just wanted to let you know that the progress is still being made on the architectural and design phase. The work that's being done, we're still continuing to meet. We still have active participation in that, and we're expecting the next level of estimates probably in the next 6 to 8 weeks at the most. We should have the next design concept on that and costing estimates. So we'll be able to inform the board at that time, or the committee at that time.
Thank you. Any questions? I know I'm zipping now along. On to other business. Any other business from folks around the table? No? Okay, with that, can I have a motion for adjournment?
Oh,
yes.
Mr. Chair, sorry, Chad, I'd like to mention something in
Oh,
closing
yes.
there, sorry.
Yes, Chad.
To
Absolutely.
your point, Director Rogers, if there is a vision for regional connectivity amongst various communities, yes, it's gonna start between neighboring communities, but it's good to set the standards for when establishing that piece of trail, knowing that at some point it may become like a regional connection, and hence develop some kind of level of service expectations amongst the regional folks here so that when these individual connections happen, they're part of a bigger picture. That could be something for the stable to consider, I guess.
Thank you, Jihad. Can I have a motion for adjournment?
I so move,
Rogers?
David.
Seconder, David, Director Duplessis, all those in favor? Against? Motion carried. Thanks, everyone. Sorry for going over the time. I understand that we all have busy schedules and appreciate everybody's discussion today.
Mr. Chair.